Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 24, being recorded on June 16, 2022. We just did Livestream number 23 yesterday, and I had some content left over from that. We're going to cover that. I was hoping to expand on it a bit, but that's going to have to wait for number 25, I think, because there's just a lot to cover, and that's the way it goes. So, anyway, what's new on the channel? I just uploaded On Strikes from 1899 by Lenin. It's about 25 minutes long and just a nice overview, some very early Lenin. Lenin started in about 1893, writing anything at all. So this was, again, pretty early. It was before the newspaper Iskra was set up, the Spark. It was before What Is to Be Done was published. It was before the first Russian Revolution. So very early on, and gives something of a Marxist perspective on labor unions and strikes. They're basically a natural development. When workers realize how exploited they are in capitalism, they start to strike and have various actions against capitalists. First to just sort of lash out, but then also after they realize how much strength there is in unity, they start getting more and more purposeful about it, more strategic about it. And this is where socialists have to come in and spread socialist ideology, that we can actually end capitalism if we unite, not just against the capitalists on the shop floor, but to completely abolish capitalism across the board. So it's a good listen. And, you know, as we've been doing a lot of different things about labor organizing and how to, this is an important thing for everybody to just sort of touch base on and, you know, refresh your memory as far as Marxist stances towards labor organizing. It's very important, but it can't stop at just, you know, better wages and conditions. Definitely yes to that, but we've also got to infuse revolutionary ideology into it as well. Beyond that, somebody mentioned during the live stream yesterday that Bernie Sanders and Lindsey Graham had a debate. I haven't watched the full thing yet. I did see a couple of clips, and I posted a few comments about that on Twitter and on the YouTube community tab. And basically, you know, my take on that, there's a few clips of Bernie talking for 3 or 4 minutes, and I said that these were good starter talking points. You know, it's familiar if you've heard the Bernie Sanders 2016 or 2020 campaigns. Good starter talking points to push back against big capital during this time of crisis. But unfortunately, what's very clear is we can't trust Bernie not to sell out the movement to the 1% controlled Democratic Party. So Dem exit, it's a must, it's necessary. But you can't just Dem exit and then sort of, you know, drop out of society. Like, you're still here, capitalism's still here. You have to organize and fight capital. That's the only thing we can really do for liberation. So the US left needs to build an independent mass left party or coalition of left parties, or we will continue to suffer. It's that simple. So the Green Party is the minimum next move, and there's obviously other left parties organizing as well. And I think that all left forces need to come together in a coalition and strategize about how to build this up where, you know, it's not just about the electoral politics. It's about having a base that is free of bourgeois influence for engaging in class struggle and strategizing about how to do that effectively. I mentioned on yesterday's live stream, there's an interview on the Bad Empanada 2 channel with an Uruguayan leftist about how they did it and how they built a left coalition to fight their two-party system. It can be done. So anyway, I included a quote also from Marx and Engels' address of the Central Committee to the Communist League from 1850, which is currently the pinned video for returning subscribers to the YouTube channel. So the quote is, and Marx and Engels were talking in 1850 during the 1849 revolutionary period when the bourgeoisie of Western Europe was kind of completing the capitalist revolution, if you will, overthrowing sort of the remnants of the monarchies. And obviously there are still some remnants today, but it was when the capitalists were really consolidating their power politically and setting up their bourgeois governments. So Marx and Engels were giving prescriptions for what do the workers do now that these new bourgeois governments are coming into place and the workers aren't quite ready to seize power. What do we do? So, quote, the destruction of the bourgeois democrats' influence over the workers and the enforcement of conditions which will compromise the rule of bourgeois democracy, which is for the moment inevitable, and to make it as difficult as possible. These are the main points which the proletariat, and therefore the League, referring to the Communist League, basically the first socialist party back in that time, must keep in mind during and after the approaching uprising, which the approaching uprising was the capitalists overthrowing the monarchy and feudalism. As soon as the new governments have established themselves, these will be the new capitalist governments, their struggle against the workers will begin. Because, of course, capitalism is all about the bourgeoisie exploiting the proletariat, and you need to keep the proletariat down if you're a capitalist. If the workers are to be able to forcibly oppose the democratic petty bourgeois, it is essential above all for them to be independently organized and centralized into clubs, even where there is no prospect of achieving their election. So talking about getting organized and running workers' candidates. Even where there is no prospect of achieving their election, the workers must put up their own candidates to preserve their independence, to gauge their own strength, and to bring their revolutionary position and party standpoint to public attention. They must not be led astray by the empty phrases of the Democrats, who will maintain that the workers' candidates will split the Democratic Party and offer the forces of reaction the chance of victory. All such talk means, in the final analysis, that the proletariat is to be swindled. The progress which the proletarian party will make by operating independently in this way is infinitely more important than the disadvantages resulting from the presence of reactionaries in the representative body. So that was Marx and Engels on the topic of workers organizing independently. You do not try to become an appendage to the bourgeois or the Democratic Party. Bourgeois democracy is what they're talking about here. So what Sanders did was wrong. What the right wing of DSA that thinks that they can reform the Democratic Party or run workers' candidates within the bourgeois party, all that's wrong. It's not correct, and the Democratic Party cannot be reformed. That should be incredibly clear to everyone at this point. So anyway, updates on the channel, that's basically what's new there. So before we get into the articles for today, we'll just catch up with the chat for a minute. So somebody says they watched the Prol Cult video that I recommended, the one about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I can't believe I never heard of that channel before. The Ukraine video and the one about decay, decay and fascism are really fantastic. They made my understanding about those topics clearer. Thank you for making a post about them. You're welcome. Other good channels deserve to be promoted and supported. So yeah. What else do we have? Somebody says James from Prol Cult. I think James is one of, two people from Prol Cult, was on Morin's stream, Marxist Paul, and talked about the British left, climate collapse, etc. If you want to get a better feel on them. I haven't heard that interview, but yeah, there's, there are definitely other good channels out there. Somebody says Bernie and the squad are going to be here for a while. Yeah, I mean, as capitalism goes into crisis, we talked about, some of the far right, pseudo-revolutionary things, fascist things that are going to get put out. As people become more and more alarmed and look for solutions, the bourgeoisie is going to put up their fakes and alternatives to try to divert energy away from socialism and spin it into other movements that are ineffective, go nowhere, or wind up reinforcing the status quo. Fascism is one of them. And then, we just talked about clinging to the Democratic Party. The fundamental task of the U.S. left is to break with the Democratic Party and with all capitalist parties. So this Bernie and the squad thing, I mean, they could lead a mass exodus of the left out of the Democratic Party. I mean, most of the left, I would say, is not in the Democratic Party, but those portions of the left which are still attempting to reform the Democrats, they could easily lead them out of that, and they're not. So, those of us who get it will work around that. But I think that the attacks on that kind of strategy need to be pretty relentless. It's just flatly wrong. So. What else? Ooh, somebody was up at the ER till 4 a.m. getting stitches. That sucks. All right. Well, anyway, let's get into today's content, some of those leftover articles from yesterday. Now, they may be leftover, but there's nothing stale about them. And no, that really wasn't intended to be a pun, but you get what I'm saying. So let's talk about right-wing stuff, right-wing organizing, starting with the Buffalo shooting. So here's an article from May 26, 2022. Authorities are investigating if retired federal agent knew of Buffalo mass shooting plans in advance. This is by Lou Michel and Dan Herbeck from the Buffalo News. And before we begin this article, the relationship of cops to crime in the United States, probably everywhere, but I can definitely speak for the United States. We have a meme. Where is it? It is one of the Say the Line memes, and why do I not have a copy of it? Oh, here we go. Here we go. 2 weeks after every mass shooting event, Say the Line news media, subject was known to the FBI. Why is it every time? So it turns out that a retired, retired, we'll put that in quotes, FBI agent was in very small chat rooms with the shooter. Was he there for business or pleasure? Let's read the article. Law enforcement officers are investigating whether a retired federal agent had about 30 minutes advance notice of a white supremacist's plans to murder black people at a Buffalo supermarket. Two law enforcement officials told the Buffalo News. Authorities believe the former agent, believed to be from Texas, was one of at least 6 individuals who regularly communicated with accused gunman Peyton Gendron in an online chat room where racist hatred was discussed, the 2 officials said. Now, this guy's a former agent, right? This ostensibly wasn't part of an undercover operation or something like that. He's just your average fucking FBI cop hanging out in racist chat room, or sorry, an online chat room where racist hatred was discussed. This is typical. There's a lot of sort of confusion in the sort of rad lib portion of the quote left about the role of law enforcement under capitalism and the state generally. But by and large, these are extremely reactionary people. That's why they're working as hired thugs for the capitalist class. This kind of thing is not uncommon. So anyway, continuing. The 2 law enforcement sources with direct knowledge of the investigation stated that these individuals were invited by Gendron to read about his mass shooting plans and the target location about 30 minutes before Gendron killed 10 people at Tops Markets on Jefferson Avenue on May 14. The News could not determine if the retired agent accepted the invitation. Well, these were like-minded people who used this chat group to talk about their shared interests in racial hatred, replacement theory, and hatred of anyone who is Jewish, a person of color, or not of European ancestry, said one of the 2 law enforcement officials with close knowledge of the investigation. What is especially upsetting is that these 6 people received advance notice of the Buffalo shooting about 30 minutes before it happened. Quote, the FBI has verified that none of these people called law enforcement to warn them about the shooting. The FBI database shows no advance tips from anyone that the shooting was about to happen, unquote. Agents from the FBI are in the process of tracking down and interviewing the 6 people, including the retired agent, and attempting to determine if any of them should be charged as accomplices, the 2 sources with close knowledge of the probe told the Buffalo News. The 2 sources did not identify the agent by name and could not confirm what federal agency he worked for. The Buffalo FBI office declined to comment on the investigation. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Buffalo declined through a spokeswoman to comment. Buffalo civil rights attorney John V. Elmore said it will be outrageous if it turns out that a former law enforcement official had advance notice of the shooting and did nothing to prevent it. I mean, we see all kinds of outrageous things. The cops are shooting people in the back. I mean, they're shooting unarmed people left and right in this country. What exactly would be unusual about this? It's outrageous, but it's par for the course. At some point, you got to just say, like, these aren't flukes. This is how the system works. Quote, if he had advance notice, he had a moral obligation. Lamau, what can I say? To get on the phone and try to notify someone about it, said Elmore, who represents the family of Andre McNeil, who was shot dead when he went to Tops to buy a birthday cake for his 3-year-old son. Attorney Terrence M. Connors, who is representing several families who lost loved ones in the shooting, said, quote, as outrageous as this may sound, based upon what we are finding in our investigation, it is not surprising. He declined to reveal the evidence his law firm has collected. The New York Times reported May 17 that Gendron invited a small group of people into a private chat room on the messaging platform Discord to review his plan about 30 minutes before the massacre at Tops. The Washington Post reported 2 days later that 15 people accepted Gendron's invitation into the Discord chat room and were able to review his plan and watch his live stream video as he committed the killings. Oh, right, because he live streamed it. Forgot about that. What a country, folks. Federal authorities are investigating if the retired agent provided information to Gendron before he went on his shooting spree, the 2 law enforcement officials told the news. In addition to law enforcement sources, 2 other individuals with knowledge of the mass shooting investigation have also confirmed that federal authorities are looking into the former agent's relationship to the shooter. The Sandman. Ominous. FBI agents are also trying to determine the identity of an individual Gendron calls Sandman and Saint Sandman in his lengthy social media diary that appeared on Discord 30 minutes before the attack, the sources said. In the diary, Gendron indicates Sandman counseled him on manufacturers of AR-15 semi-automatic rifles and their quality. The shooter purchased and allegedly used that type of assault rifle in the rampage, which local authorities have said was fueled by his racial hatred. In the document Gendron posted on Discord just prior to the shooting, he references Sandman 3 times. In a passage dated May 2, he quoted Saint Sandman as saying, quote, when the time finally comes to deal decisively with a whole host of society's problems, not go to prison for it, you'll know. Well, so much for that. Just be ready. You have spent your entire life, from the day you were born, right up to this very moment, reading the sentence coming to where you are right now. Look around you. Are you content with where you are right now? Are you where you want to be? If so, continue to march. If not, what are you going to do? What's your plan? Get and keep your mind, body, and spirit right. Pray, lift, run, read, shoot, and teach your kids to do those things, unquote. So before we finish the article, this kind of stuff goes on constantly in right-wing forums and chat rooms and all this kind of stuff. It's like a constant refrain why we see so much right-wing terrorism in the United States. This is how they think, and they're primed for it from the individualistic ideology that they have already accepted. And, you know, they channel their alienation into doing this kind of stuff. I'm not saying that we can change the minds of all these people. It gets pretty thick. I mean, when you get somebody who's grown up, this is going back to comments yesterday about, do I know anybody who's in that fascist headspace? The United States is a fascist headspace. So, yeah, of course, we all do. And then when somebody, you know, starts becoming somewhat conscious of what's going on, the number of vectors for spinning them into the far right is enormous. And, you know, but just to counter that a little bit, I mean, in one very obvious way, you know, you have spent your entire life from the day you were born right up to this very moment reading the sentence coming to where you are right now. I mean, that may be true, but also people make mistakes in life. So not every sort of life course is the best of all possible worlds. Before doing something extremely rash and, you know, I mean, this guy literally murdered a whole bunch of people and ended his own life before it ever began. You know, he's like a teenager and the rest of his life is just fucked. So, I mean, is that really a good use of your life? The problem is, people at that age, your brain's not fully developed. There's all kinds of things. Like you just have no judgment. If you're 17 years old, 18 years old, you don't have a clue. I say that as somebody who used to be 17 and 18 years old. You don't have a clue. I mean, you're probably confused and whatever else, but let me just tell you, things become clearer as you age. You're still a child and, doing extremely horrible things like this, which, by the way, includes joining the military, where you can do very similar things, but in an authorized capacity. It's a mistake. Don't do it. Anyway, continuing the article. A third law enforcement source told the news that they're aware of Gendron's writings involving the quality of different rifles. The shooter ended up using a Bushmaster X15, a version of the AR-15 rifle, police have reported. So anyway, hanging out with ex-FBI agents while you're working your way up to a mass shooting based on like Nazi theories, basically. Pretty typical day in the United States for far too many people. So next article about this kid. I feel like the headline says a lot. Cat decapitation should have prompted risk exam of Top's gunman, says animal abuse expert. It's a shorter article. So basically, I just took an excerpt here. There was a cat that was attacking his cat, I guess, like some wild cat or some neighbor's cat. And he trapped it in a garage. And well, there's a thing. Anyway, he really violently attacked the cat. So, content warning. I want to skip the next minute. How Gendron attacked and killed the cat indicates a level of aggressiveness that would have put his actions into a category of high risk on a scale used by animal cruelty experts in assessing public safety risk, he said. This was a behavior expert. Well, cutting its head off is not a typical behavior. That would be a high-risk behavior for sure. Gendron wrote on March 25th that he went into his garage to check on his own screaming cat and found a gray cat attacking her. He said he spent 90 minutes chasing the cat around the garage. So what would be the normal thing to do? Shoo it away. Cats are notoriously skittish. They will usually leave. Instead, he spent 90 minutes chasing the cat around the garage, stabbing it with a hunting knife, slamming its head, and swinging a hatchet at its neck. He then posted a picture of the animal with its head detached inside a shallow grave. So, really quite invested here, digging a grave for it. Honestly, right now, I don't feel anything about killing the cat. I thought I would be in pain, but I just literally feel blank, he wrote. That's a really bad sign. When people do bad things and they numb out, well, that is a good way to work yourself up to further violence. Also, a potential trait indicating a psychopath. Anyway, that's extraordinarily dangerous territory. Several studies have suggested a strong link between animal abuse and mass violence against people. Yes. In 2018, researchers examined 20 mass shootings and active shooter cases that involved offenders who had abused animals. The offenders who had abused animals were more likely to be young and white, less likely to die at the crime scene, and more likely to kill and wound many victims. So what's the more likely to kill and wound many victims thing? It means you don't snap out of it. They start doing the thing and they don't stop. They don't go, what the fuck am I doing? Most people would get to the what the fuck am I doing point well before actually pulling the trigger. They don't get to that point even after repeatedly doing extremely horrific, violent things. So anyway, this is not exactly like an inside job type of thing. But again, the relationship of cops to crime, it's interesting. We'll see where that ex-FBI thing goes, if there are further details about that in the future. But I thought it was worth noting as, more information comes out about this case of, people wonder, I think rightfully, why do so many of these things happen? And we have a fascist country. That's basically the bottom line. The far right has been making inroads for decades now. They're on the front doorstep. They're here. They're inside the house. This is at a really advanced state at this point. And clearly they're capable of, targeting younger, especially white male people to buy into this ideology, people who have no real judgment, aren't neurologically developed at that point. A lot of them really are younger, like early 20s and under. And the outcome is horrific in an overall horrific system. I'm not really doing this full justice. Again, it's a country with just an epidemic of gun violence, and this is, to my mind, symptoms of a collapsing society that is increasingly embracing fascism as an attempted way out of this whole situation. So anyway, before we go on to a couple more articles about far-right organizing, and more specifically about open organized movements, let's catch up with the chat here. Cops will even shoot a pregnant woman. Yep, covered that. I mean, they'll do anything. They really will. Doesn't our CIA and FBI incite terrorist violence in foreign occupied territories? I mean, they do it here too. So yeah, but this is basically how to destabilize a country. Is, you know, make it so that people don't feel safe doing basic things. You know, it's an attack on any kind of sort of open, even bourgeois democratic institutions to bring in a more terroristic form of capitalist rule. So yeah, that is definitely well, you know, there's a video on the channel about Operation Gladio, which used leftover fascists from World War II, first under the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA, and then CIA and NATO. So CIA and NATO in Europe maintained a quote stay behind network of ex-fascists and, you know, other far right Nazi extremists. Basically, in the event of a Soviet invasion or just domestic communist uprisings in the post-war period, that was basically their go-to, was like, hey, tap some fascists, because they hate communists. So, you know, there's that saying, like, one Nazi and 11 people sitting around a table is actually a dozen Nazis sitting around the table. What do you call it when your government, your military, your intelligence services are employing people like that? I would say that's a fascist intelligence agency. So, yeah. It's creepy how they train like the military does. Yeah, they're paramilitary. A lot of them are former military. You know, a lot of police now are former military as well. There's a great book I want to do more with, and I just haven't. It comes and it goes. I haven't gotten into it. I've mentioned it in the past. What's the name? It's called Bring the War Home, or Bringing the War Home. Let me look that up. All right, I had to type for a second, so I muted the mic. It's coming up now. So, Bring the War Home, the White Power Movement, and Paramilitary. This is by Kathleen Belew, Belew. Have a copy of this, have not gotten all the way through it yet. Look up interviews with Kathleen Belew. It's really interesting stuff. Basically, when you have a country like the United States doing anti-communist wars like the Vietnam War, etc., so you fill soldiers up with all kinds of anti-communist sentiment. You have them kill communists on the basis that they are communists. Then the war, that particular war, is over. These people are discharged from service. What do? Well, they come back to the United States and they set up, you know, more anti-communist paramilitary groups and militias here, or they join the police or something like that. So the United States is basically a fascist engine of, you know, military and paramilitary forces. It's just flooding into every facet of life. Another comment, reading the Jakarta Method now, and many of the most reactionary military personnel of Indonesia trained in the USA. Yeah, that one's on my reading list. I haven't gotten to it yet, but I know a lot of people recommend that one. I mean, I feel like once you grasp the overall dynamics, that's the key. Of course, you know, there will always be kind of shocking and enlightening examples of it. Speaking of, another comment, Latin America alone is a shocking tale of U.S.-supported anti-democratic violence. Absolutely. The U.S. supported the last military dictatorship in Argentina. There's a good book called The Open Veins of Latin America that I highly recommend. I am putting that on my reading list. Thank you. They wiped out the entire left-wing movement. Do we know the shooter's religious background? I don't know. I'm not sure in this case that it would be hugely important. I think that probably his ideology, gained from Discord servers and things like that is probably more important. And, nothing against, although I don't know, it could have started earlier, sort of. We don't know, I don't think, what the parents' ideology is, but I haven't looked real far into this case. Sorry, I just got to save that reading. There we go. Um, speaking of, I mean, people have asked me, oh, is there an S4A Discord? And I know that, excuse me, I know it's possible. Sharp throat issue. I know it's possible to run a Discord server that is, free of hijinks. But to me, running the YouTube comments and moderating those adequately is sufficient for me in terms of managing stuff. I recently had somebody offer to like set up a Discord for me, and I'm like, no, I'm good. I really don't, let's put it this way. For things that I'm putting out there, I do feel responsible for them, and I want to make sure that the kinds of discussions and conversations that are happening there are things that are going in a kind of direction that is not totally insane and getting led down all sorts of bad paths. You look at some of the servers that are out there, there's just crazy shit going on that oftentimes is not that dissimilar from things found in right-wing servers. That's the last thing I want. So no, I do not want anything set up in the name of S4A that is not actually being um, you know monitored and moderated closely. You want to set up your own server, obviously there's a million left-wing servers out there, go for it, but that's not really something I'm particularly interested in. We're trying to do general, above ground education, and yeah, so that would be that. So yeah, somebody was talking about the cat thing as like serial killer backstory, bedwetting, animal abuse, and something else. It's like part of the triad. Um, Cops kill a lot of pets. Yes, the cop shooting a dog thing became a really sad meme, but it's worth exposing that kind of violence. The commenter says the cops threatened to shoot this person's cocker spaniel, obviously one of the least threatening dog breeds like ever. Systemic change is the only way to create the intergenerational mental health changes in the population on the population level. Yeah. I mean, that's just like the thing after mass shootings. Republicans will always be like, oh, mental illness, that's the issue. First of all, there's plenty. This is just like leftovers of really stigmatized views of mental illness. Um, I mean, off the bat, that's the start. But also, I mean, it's incredibly insincere. That's a gun lobby thing. That's not really. If they were serious about, having a better mental health environment, they would support all kinds of popular reforms to make life more livable, to decrease exploitation, to just make it so that people's lives aren't totally miserable. One of them would be Medicare for all, so that people with any sort of mental health issue could go get treatment. But they don't really mean it, so they don't support any of those things. And, one obviously glaring example of hypocrisy there. But it's every time you see a Republican saying, "Oh, mental health," mental illness caused the mass shooting, say, "Oh, so you support Medicare for all then?" Because if that's what's going on and that's only part of the story, then you would support that, right? And of course they never do. But you know, exposing the hypocrisy is important. There's always somebody who hasn't made this connection on their own yet. So I mean, and that's just one thing. The levels of alienation are staggering right now. So I'm not sure that what this is in reference to, but I think that gave the CIA their start in international drug trafficking. They needed off-the-books cash to fund their ploys in Italy. Oh, you're talking about Gladio. They needed off-the-books cash to fund their ploys in Italy and imported heroin to the U.S., which was intentionally sold in black neighborhoods. On the Lots of far-right groups in Europe were propped up originally by the U.S. on the premise that they were anti-communist, quote unquote, and they are. Just ignore the fact that they are Nazis. So yeah, literal Nazis were recycled in German intelligence post-war. So yeah, I mean, we can talk about Gladio, but also just look at the West German government, period. So yeah. And you say not that East Germany didn't do the same thing. There are at least some standards there as far as actual denazification. You know, being required not to use the Roman salute or the swastika is like one thing. That would be step zero, basically, of denazification. There's a lot of other things that need to happen along with it. Another book on the CIA is The Devil's Chessboard by David Talbot. To note. Is there a Latin American country without a U.S. coup? That's a good question. Anybody? Mention of Cuba, although of course the Cuban Revolution overthrew a dictator. So, does anyone know how it's decided which information is declassified by the U.S. government? Do we still only know a small percentage of what the CIA did 50 years ago? Yes. I think that process is probably opaque. Somebody with more expertise there probably knows. They do deny FOIA requests constantly, and even when documents are released, many times like entire pages will be blacked out, or so even when they release documents, they don't fully release documents. I think, that decision of like what gets declassified, there have been struggles against the opacity of, the CIA and other things, the Church Committee. There have been struggles to create more transparency. This was, of course, a slogan that Obama had, transparency. How far you actually get with it is another story, So yes, there were some things that were done during the New Left period in the 60s and 70s around that, but a lot of that, just trying to get information. It takes years, and even when you get it, a lot of it's missing. U.S. paid and trained agents assassinated a Chilean economist on the streets of Washington, D.C. Never punished. What was the name of that person? There was also funding of right-wing groups during 90s Yugoslavia, though I'm not sure if that was the U.S. or Germany. Reinhard Geller. Okay. And the only reason we have information about COINTELPRO is the break-in to the FBI office in Philly. Yeah, so not exactly coming out of official channels. The more I learn about the McCarthy era, the more nervous I get about living in the U.S. during climate collapse. You don't really trust anything. Orlando Letelier was the Chilean economist. Letelier. Okay. Some years ago, it was leaked that the Hungarian government has a database of citizens and their political leanings, party preference, how likely a person is to vote, stances on certain issues, how these things change over time. So yeah, Orban, when we do the follow-up video to today, I will do some material on how the Republican Party, as was mentioned in the chat, and then I found more materials on it, has been studying what they've been doing over there and trying to apply it to the United States. It's not good news. If people don't get organized, we're literally just asking for it at this point. I mean, we didn't start this class struggle, but we do need to end it. So yeah. All right, we are caught up with the chat at this point. So we are going to go into our first article. And speaking of Europe, basically, as far as far-right organizing goes, I got an article on the Austrian far-right, and then we're going to read one about the 3%ers in the US. So this is from the New Statesman, June 14, 2022, Liam Hoare. Austria's far right has found a new enemy. Deprived of the unity created by opposition to COVID measures, far right now has LGBTQ plus people in its sights. So all the anti-vax stuff that had kind of occupied the far right for a while, and that gave them a rallying point. Now that basically the governments have acquiesced to those demands, and the pandemic is, quote, over, read not over at all, just they're denying it. They need some other rallying point. They need some other thing to attack, because it is that sort of bloodthirsty scapegoating that brings them together. So, out of Vienna, for the German-speaking world's far right, COVID-19 was like manna from heaven. It brought various strands: identitarians, neo-Nazis, football hooligans, and Reichsbürger, who do not recognize the legitimacy of the modern German state, together into a single movement. Their rhetoric often trivialized and minimized National Socialism, aka Nazism, and the Holocaust. The far right also found common cause with left-wing esotericer, whose skepticism towards Western medicine and modern farming practices drew them to the anti-vax movement. Comment there. So I said in the beginning of this video, I say it a lot, that organizing is vital for the US left, and that the Green Party is the minimum next step. However, as I've also said many times, just like DSA, just like any organization, there is, relative to the center line, a left wing and a right wing. This is basic dialectics. Like anything, nothing really is monolithic per se. It takes extraordinary work to create an actually monolithic organization. Movements and grassroots things that come together. You will have some people, there's some center to the tent. If it's a big tent, there's some center to it. But there's also people on the relative right and the relative left to that center. Doesn't mean that the right wing there is the same as the right wing in the overall society, but within that movement, you're looking at a spectrum. All right. So just like within DSA, you have people on the left who are actual Marxists, and you have people on the right of DSA who think that, the Democratic Party can be reformed and they're more SOCDEMs and stuff like that. The Green Party has its right wing as well, more kind of hippie capitalist stuff and populism. And there is a fair amount of anti-vax stuff. So I think that is analogous here to the left-wing esotericer. I'm not familiar with that particular strain of like German activism or movement, but I know that the sort of skepticism towards Western medicine, modern farming, I'm guessing that's like an organic, maybe anti-GMO thing. Not everything is bad about that, but insofar as it's fueled by some reactionary beliefs, and it's not underpinned with socialist beliefs, yeah, I can see, actually, I know of some people who are kind of in that green right and also anti-vaxxers. This needs to be denounced and it needs to be fought, obviously. But yeah, because this is where you wind up if you don't fight it. So those people need to either be, voted down, persuaded out, or it's going to wind up, tainting the entire organization. That's the thing, just before we get back to the article, as kind of a side note, people are often looking for the perfect organization, the perfect party, the perfect org. This is just something that doesn't exist. No matter what organization you're in, you have to fight for your position, because there's always going to be people who just make errors or deliberately try to take it over. Now, there are some organizations like the Democratic Party where you can't even really wage that fight. You can't take it over. But even within a non-money controlled movement, you still have to engage in ideological struggle. A lot of times people wait for the perfect thing to drop out of the sky. It doesn't exist. We have to fight for our positions within society as a whole, and even within different organizations. Even organizations that, have certain stated principles don't always adhere to them. So there's always ideological struggle necessary. But yeah, this is sort of the green right. Um, and like I said, it's more of that sort of embrace of populism. We talked about Jimmy Dore yesterday, um, because Mint Press News put up a thing about, would you vote for Jimmy Dore for president? I mean, fuck no. Like, don't be ridiculous. But it's that kind of, you know, sort of know nothing populism. We really need to fight that. It's why I've done a lot of videos against that on the channel. It's not all people like Caleb Maupin who are really, I think, consciously fascist adjacent on purpose. There's also a lot of stuff that, out of sheer ignorance, blunders towards it. Sheer ignorance and sort of anti-communist propaganda that they have assimilated, over the years. But anyway, it needs to be fought. That's why we do outlets like this and why we try to have conversations like this. And again, not everybody who looks at alternatives to, quote, Western medicine as a Nazi, not everybody who's into organic food is a Nazi, but you do have to kind of watch out for how these movements get hijacked, and there's a good example. All right, continuing. In Austria, last year's lockdown for the unvaccinated and planned to be the first nation in Europe to introduce a vaccine mandate were catalysts for the COVID skeptic movement. On 20 November, the Saturday after the mandate was announced by the then Chancellor Alexander Schallenberg, the far-right Freedom Party, FPO, rallied 40,000 people for a march through Vienna. Throughout the winter, tens of thousands of COVID skeptic demonstrators would regularly shut down the capital's Ringstrasse on Saturdays, turning parts of the city into no-go zones. The Austrian parliament passed the vaccine mandate law with a two-thirds majority in January, but its implementation, initially planned for mid-March, has twice been postponed. The combination of the mandate being put on ice and the liberalization of pandemic management measures, the nationwide mask mandate was lifted at the beginning of June, took the wind out of the COVID skeptic movement's sails. The Documentation Center of Austrian Resistance, or DOW, which researches and monitors far-right extremism in Austria, has observed that, having lost momentum and looking to regain relevancy, far-right groups are currently groping for a new theme over which they can bond. And before we go on to the rest of the article, just recall, like the trucker protest, there's a reason that we took stands against all of this stuff on the channel, because it really does, if you want to wind up in fascist adjacent territory, that's a good way to do it, by being lax on that stuff. You just can't. So anyway, while some have latched on to the Great Reset, a conspiracy that claims a group of world leaders orchestrated the pandemic to take control of the global economy, as if they didn't have it already, what petty bourgeois paranoia there? I mean, honestly. The coming of Pride Month has refocused the far-right's attention on Austria's LGBTQ plus community. Catholic fundamentalists, always a fun group, in the country have long opposed Vienna's annual Regenbogenparade, Rainbow Parade, holding a concurrent March for the Family. If that's what your family is about, fuck you. If your family is about hating other people, then fuck your family. That usually attracts a couple of hundred supporters. This year, however, the start of Vienna Pride animated a spectrum of far-right groups, Catholic fundamentalists, but also corona deniers, neo-Nazis, and identitarians. They're getting bolder. The latter, a far-right youth movement opposed to liberalism and multiculturalism, claimed, and not the kind of, liberalism meaning capitalism, they mean sort of left liberalism, bourgeois freedom, different kinds of rights. They are in favor of a more terroristic form of capitalist rule. They're not actually opposed to capitalism, but, more of the freedom of liberalism and multiculturalism, claimed responsibility for an attempt to disrupt a drag queen story hour, which the local drag queen Candy Licious was due to host at a public library in Vienna on 3 June. The night before, far-right activists had erected a concrete wall blocking the library's... I did not purposely say library. That was a malfunction. Was due to host at a public library, there we go, in Vienna on 3 June. The night before, far-right activists... Oh, reading the wrong sentence with library in it. Continuing, painted red, white, red like the Austrian flag and branded it with the slogan hashtag No Pride Month. The event went ahead in the afternoon as planned, though only after the wall had been cleared away. Police had been called in to guard the premises. Clashes between anti-fascist and far-right protesters near the library led to one person being taken into custody, police reported. Quote, "We will never accept children in this country being indoctrinated with sexual propaganda," read leaflets found around the wall by the journalist Marcus Schulzbacher. You know, can I just say, how many times a day are children, and indeed everyone in society, exposed to material promoting heterosexuality as normal? That is also sexual propaganda. You know, I mean, the mere existence of LGBTQ plus people is interpreted as propaganda by the far right. Why should we not also recognize, using this logic, I suppose, that all of the modeling of heteronormative ideas is also that? Oh, you're just okay with it because why? You're okay with that, but not the other thing. This is just about hate. It's not about, protecting children or whatever. Because news, there are LGBTQ plus children. I know they maybe don't want to believe that in the far right, but where do you even start to attack the ignorance that is behind this hate? Anyway, that language was mirrored in a press release from the FPO city councilor to Leo Kohlbauer, who argued that, quote, "This form of sexualization propaganda for small children is to be clearly rejected. It was unacceptable," he went on, that, quote, "children are being indoctrinated." It's always this, it's shoved down our throat, it's indoctrination, whatever. Meanwhile, again, how many times do children see heterosexual couples hug or kiss or hold hands or whatever? But no, when anyone else does it, it's, quote, propaganda. The children are being indoctrinated with this publicly financed, they used my tax dollars, globo-homo ideology, and that is a quote. The weird term, I mean, it's more than weird, globo-homo, a portmanteau of globalism and homosexuality, is pilfered from international alt and far-right discourse, as well as Putinism, and was also to be found in the aforementioned leaflet. The pandemic has accelerated an internationalization and homogenization of far-right interests and ideas, tactics, memes, and propaganda. I would add, we were talking about the Tea Party yesterday, which was already there. You had the super patriot groups, the, what are they called? Sovereign citizens, all these different far-right groups that came out of the woodwork after 2008 in the form of the Tea Party. That far-right convergence has just been increasing and increasing. So, and this is not new. We're talking about 15 years back now, basically. In February, Austria's COVID skeptic movement organized an Ottawa-style, so the, quote, freedom convoy, parade of cars and trucks aimed at jamming Vienna's road transport links. The horse deworming agent ivermectin, meanwhile, first promoted as an agent against COVID-19 by the American right, was later promulgated as a cure-all by the FPO leader Herbert Kickl. Several Austrians died during the pandemic after prescribing themselves ivermectin. Bill Gates and George Soros were enemies of the COVID skeptic movement in the German-speaking world, as they were internationally. And of course, for all the wrong reasons. Bill Gates, monopoly capitalist, George Soros, financier. These are not people whose roles in the economy we support as socialists. However, the far right, I mean, they do this with like the Rothschilds or whatever. They always pick out a few. It's never about the system. It's always about like a few people that they scapegoat, that it's some sort of like family bloodline thing. It isn't. This is why we teach Marxism here. It's about the entire system driven by material interests, and we're not going to overcome it by just scapegoating a few groups, and putting the right people in concentration camps. That isn't how this works. So too is drag queen story hours, events held in public libraries at which drag queens read age-appropriate books to preteen children. which enraged the liberal and socially conservative wing of the American right years before they attracted the ire of the Austrian far right. So they're kind of just aping the US tactics at this point. And when the Texas state representative, Brian Slayton, proposed to introduce a bill banning children from attending drag shows, he used the language that Austria's far right had learned from conservatives in the US. This is like literally that meme of the girl trying to copy over the shoulder of the other girl at a desk. And it's like US, and then Nazi Germany is copying off of the US's test. And then there's another girl cloned behind her that is the US again, copying off of Nazi Germany, copying off of the US. That is basically what this is. Where was I? Oh, yes. Quote, perverted adults. So again, just, if you're LGBTQ plus, you're just not normal, you're perverted, and your existence is not acceptable to them. Well, fuck you. I'm sorry. It's not up to you. Anyway, perverted adults are obsessed with sexualizing young children. That's not what this is about at all, Slayton said, also evoking a rhetorical trend on the American far right of calling one's enemies perverts, groomers, and pedophiles. Which that as well, I mean, we saw this against Disney because Disney did something, I think, that Ron DeSantis didn't like in Florida. And so, suddenly you have the entire Republican Party calling Disney, groomers and pedophiles. Who actually is most likely to perpetrate that kind of thing? Straight white men. Sorry. Facts. The danger posed by the Western far right's recent focus on the LGBTQ plus community, and specifically trans and non-binary people, is not merely rhetorical, of course. So another mention of Florida. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis' Don't Say Gay bill prohibits public school teachers from discussing sexual orientation or gender identity, while last year, Viktor Orban's regime in Hungary introduced a ban on the, quote, portrayal and the promotion of sexual orientation for people under 18. So this is what I was talking about before. So I guess you're also going to not have any reference to any public display of affection whatsoever for heterosexual people because, again, we live in a society where that is promoted on a constant basis as acceptable and normal. In fact, if you deviate from, you're really viciously repressed if you don't conform to that in all kinds of ways. So anyway, I mean, I'm glad to see that there is as much pushback on this as there is, and I think some fairly effective pushback. We have to keep it up, obviously, even if you are straight, even if you're cis, whatever, this has to be, there needs to be massive pushback because they gain a foothold through this, and then, that just gives them a platform to launch additional attacks. Just like the, first they came for the ... That is exactly what they do. And it's relentless. So, they never stop. They will never really admit wrongdoing by the system. It will always be some scapegoat, and maybe it will be your group next. Anyway, in May, the U.S. political pressure group CPAC held its conference in Budapest, bringing together American and European ultra-conservatives. Its sessions included Western Civilization Under Attack and The Father is a Man, the Mother is a Woman. Shorn of the COVID skeptic, and by the way, if you ask people to actually back this up, reason it out, they can't ever. It's just a collection of slogans. So there's something to be said for standing ground. Obviously, pick your battles because a lot of these people are dangerous. So, shorn of the COVID skeptic, anti-vaxxer cause that forged new alliances, raised their profile, and extended their reach, the far right, not only in Austria but around the world, casting around for a new adversary. In the LGBTQ plus community, it may have found one. So that's the end of that article. Before we go on to the next one, I do want to catch up with the chat. I have to take a break for 1 second, so I'll be right back. All right. And good news. I thought I had just one article on the US right. Actually, there are two. So, all right. Where were we in the chat? There we are. The fascists organize around their weakness. COVID is killing people for bourgeois profits, organized around stopping public health. Yeah, well, I mean, this is what we saw with COVID a lot was people in the US, their last words before being hooked up to a ventilator to die being COVID isn't real. You know, the amount of people insisting that they caught pneumonia from wearing a mask, not from the virus that is provably going around and you know, hurting and killing people. They just won't believe it because it's so politicized. You know, and in the US, it's kind of the entire right. I think in other countries, it's much less politicized, masks and vaccines. In other countries, I think it's more of just the far right. But I mean, I think that that tells you something about how far right the US right is. The original Nazis of Germany and Austria were esoteric. Well, so I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that. I know that there were, esoteric is kind of a vague word. I know that there was sort of some like occultism uh, loosely attached to the Nazi movement. I mean, like just the use of the swastika and things like that. I think some of that gets built up with just sort of mystification about the class nature of what, you know, Nazism was about. But I don't know. I don't think it's quite the same as in this context here. All right. There's stuff about the Sino-Soviet split that's unfortunately not really the topic today. I read that just recently in Michigan, they wanted to make June Pride Month, but Republicans wanted to make them include the disclaimer, not everyone approves of the lifestyle in promotional media. Yeah, we're aware of that. And it's not a lifestyle. It's just who people are. It's, you know, they want to reduce it to this just sort of like choice people make. Like it's, again, they want to highlight their concept that they promote to make people feel bad about who they are, that it's some deviation, that it's this sin that people like choose to do, and it's this fall from grace and all this kind of shit that they put out there. This is just the way people are. Not everybody is. Anyway, the people who hound on this the most tend to have the most to hide, as we all know. But really, it just creates such problems for everyone else, up to and including, I mean, really being subjected to horrible violence as well as discrimination in housing, discrimination in jobs. There are all kinds of things. I do have actually more readings that I did pull. I will be doing before the end of Pride Month. Again, you know, things at S4A often do not really run along. I wanted May to be more of like a labor related thing, and then I pulled a bunch of readings um, related to socialism and LGBTQ plus struggles. It just things do not really run on the timeline that I would like. There will be more of that on the channel soon, though, because I did find some good writings. But yeah, we know not everyone approves of it, and the people who disapprove of it are kind of just a bunch of assholes, and we need to marginalize them and deprive them of political power as fast as possible because they're just trying to stir up conflict for the sake of defending capitalism. Um, exactly, these far right people always blame rich individuals or families like that's something new. Like there were rich families in feudalism and slavery. So maybe it's the system that allows these people to stay in power. Yeah, maybe it's the fact that, you know, the cops and courts are all in for private property, and that once you have a system like that, it sort of just runs on this logic of consolidating wealth and exploiting people and proletarianizing the population, leaving people dispossessed, ruined, without property, and having to sell our labor time to just, you know, exist. So I did not see Bad Empanada's video on how the US inspired Nazi Germany. However, that is true. So yeah. I mean, Hitler said as much. In fact, he was surprised that there was so much uproar as there was, which was belated as it was about the Holocaust, because the US had genocided Native Americans. So Hitler was like, what's the big deal? The US did it. So that's the kind of precedent stuff like this sets. And the US is still clinging to all of this. Like they don't really, I mean, the question of reparations over slavery, for example, is like still unresolved. The US just doesn't want to face up to anything. And, you know, claims about corporations being left are particularly fatuous. Yeah, it's totally absurd. They complain about wokeness and stuff like that. And then they do these like ineffective boycotts of like Nike, where they'll go out and like buy a couple $100 worth of Nike gear and then like burn it on video and probably singe their eyebrows off in the process. Like you just spent money like on your quote boycott. Um, but yeah, the right wing attempts boycotts, but what can I even say about that? I mean, these people are incapable of critical thinking. I mean, it's sort of a defining thing about how you end up at right wing positions. You're going along with the flow. You're just sort of, getting swept along by these reactionary currents. If they were able to assert themselves at all intellectually and think critically about the claims being made, they wouldn't be part of that movement. So yeah, they're not exactly known for deep thought. But yeah, the idea that corporations being left wing, but then again, they think Joe Biden's left wing. They'll swallow anything. It's utter laziness and an inability to think critically. So, say it again, reminding myself I do have sort of a little mini curriculum about just basic critical thinking, evaluating evidence coming up on the channel. Um, I don't think it should fall to a small YouTube channel with 8,000 subs to do stuff like that, but it's not common enough knowledge, honestly. But yeah. If you read Hitler, he directly states the country most similar to his goals is the USA. Absolutely. Hitler even says, just as the USA has its Wild West, we still have our Wild East with Lebensraum. Cis people have to stand up for us trans and non-binary comrades, please. Solidarity. Yes, absolutely. And everybody who waffles on that needs to be confronted. They're part of the problem. You have people like Maupin, for example, who, is not exactly the biggest influence, but tries to exist within a quote left space and is extremely, he'll always point to like, I mean, basically some of my best friends are trans, like there are trans people within CPI or whatever. And then we'll just go back to doing fascist adjacent stuff, interviewing people on the channel who make egregious statements against transgender people, um, and not really question it or not be like, okay, we're done, or you can't say that or whatever. It needs to be confronted. It is absolutely part of the problem. So somebody says, I'm doing what I can to reason with bigots or bigot adjacents online. Yeah, I mean, reasoning with them, again, reason not a strong suit, but make your objection known, point out a couple of reasons why, just hit them with what you can. Anything does help. And as the commenter continues, I've had to deal with anti-Semitism and transphobia as an educator. Any help is worthwhile. So yeah. So somebody says you get booted from my party for purposely misgendering in the UK. What party is that? Because that's good. Because I know that there's other. I mean, the UK is like home of a lot of transphobic stuff. It's become like kind of a defining feature of the UK at this point. And I know that that extends to, unfortunately, some of the Marxist parties, which is, I mean, part of this sort of, I'm just so sick of talking about it at this point. But yeah, that seems to be a thoroughly British feature. Same as the KKK, cultism, secret societies use rituals to create shared experience and pseudo kinship between members to promote cohesion. We see this kind of thing with, I think I mentioned the Marxist Project's video about the far right in Ukraine. They do the tiki torches thing too, just like we saw at Charlottesville, stuff like that. Yeah, there is this kind of weird sort of, you know, ritualistic, like primal aspect to it. This is not a kind of current you want to see resurrected in modern society. You know, sort of that sort of thinking plus modern technology is a really destructive combination. Like tribalism kind of thing. Throwback to when an ultra-conservative anti-LGBTQ European MP was caught in a gay orgy. Again, it's like the Bill Hicks thing. Like the louder the right wing screams, like the more skeletons are in the closet. But you know, the atmosphere of repression and judgment and condemnation creates this thing where when you have a weak-willed person who is scared and maybe traumatized from seeing others being persecuted, they don't feel they don't feel okay being who they are. I mean, it's wrong, and they should make every effort to get out of there and get to a more supportive environment if they can. But yeah, a victim becoming perpetrator is not okay. But that's unfortunately what happens in a lot of these places where people don't feel okay coming out because of the horrific environment, and then they wind up becoming a perpetrator of that environment. It's not okay, and people need to just you know stop doing that. I don't know what else to say. um the US is still committing genocide, yes. All right, so we have the apparently obligatory comment about this is not a working class issue. Eat shit, you're banned from the chat. Um, you know, who do you think is being targeted by these anti-LGBTQ plus laws? Is it mainly capitalists? This this takes very little brain power to figure this out. Yeah, they think Hillary Clinton is a communist along with Tucker Carlson, etc. What can you do? It is largely brainless. So, you know, I don't know. At a certain point, these people just have to be fought. We want to do as much education and organizing as we can before it gets to that point. All right. Yeah, since there are BIPOC workers and LGBTQIA plus workers, therefore we have to stand for them in their struggle because they exist and they are workers and they face discrimination that cis white people don't face. Worker is muscled white man working with his hands, ooga booga. Yeah, there's too much of that. I've seen that even in the quote unquote Marxist world, and honestly, that's how you get to fascism. So we cannot act like there's a platonic ideal of a worker somewhere out there. Yeah, workers are people who work for a living, and people who are not capitalists, people who do not make their living off of capital, who have to sell their labor to get by, or rely or otherwise not in a position to make a living off of capital. So anyway, let's move on to the next article. This one is, and I lost my, there we go, lost my file select screen. So this is our first shorter article about US right-wing organizing. This is from Vice, not always the best source, but everything we know about the 31 Patriot Front members arrested in a U-Haul. The white nationalist group is notoriously secretive and optics obsessed, but now the mask is off. This is from June 14 by Tess Owen. You can see there some of the people arrested, and do you notice anything in common? Ladies and gentlemen, the master race. For years, many members of the white nationalist group Patriot Front have mostly managed to keep their identities under wraps, but now the mask is off. 31 members of the notoriously secretive, optics-obsessed group, including their leader, were arrested in Idaho over the weekend, and mugshots and names of all 31 arrestees were released by the Kootenai County Sheriff's Office. The group was traveling in the back of a U-Haul on Saturday, apparently headed to downtown Coeur d'Alene, where an annual LGBTQ pride event and a far-right counter-event was underway when they were intercepted by local law enforcement. Coeur d'Alene police said that a concerned citizen called the cops when they noticed a group who resembled, quote, a little like an army, clambering into the back of a U-Haul with shields. Video footage showed police rolling up the rear door to reveal men packed like sardines into the back of the truck. All the men were in Patriot Front uniform, khakis, navy jackets, sunglasses, caps, gloves, and white balaclavas covering their faces. Unsurprisingly, all 31 of the men who were arrested were white and male per the group's requirements. According to a booking memo, all men were aged between 20 and 40. Patriot Front typically requires members to be under the age of 35. They hailed from a dozen different states, 7 from Texas, 6 from Utah, and 5 from Washington. Just 2 are from Idaho, but neither is from Coeur d'Alene. They were booked on misdemeanor charges of conspiracy to riot. Law enforcement recovered shields, shin guards, and a smoke grenade in the rented U-Haul truck. The arrests set off an online feeding frenzy among anti-fascist activists, trying to glean more information about the men behind the names and mugshots. Again, comment, remember, Antifa work is 95% research. Remember it. An activist group in Spokane, Washington, identified brothers Michelle Buster and Josiah Buster, both arrested in Idaho. They are the sons of Matt Buster, who leads a congregation called the Real Men's Ministry. I'm sure that's not toxic at all, and has ties to former Washington State Rep Matt Shea, who was accused by his colleagues of domestic terrorism. Was that also the guy who wanted to do the youth army or something like that? Who went to Ukraine and was I think trying to kidnap kids for a fascist youth army. Anyway, there's somebody was doing that. I feel like it might have been him. Anyway, activists in Portland, Oregon identified another arrestee, Jared Boyce, as being formerly affiliated with a slightly more moderate far-right group, Patriot Prayer, particularly in connection with the anti-lockdown movement. So you see the COVID thing there in March 2020. Patriot Front formed in 2017 as a splinter faction of a neo-Nazi group, Vanguard America, which came under heavy scrutiny after members were seen at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, marching alongside James Alex Fields, who later rammed his car into a crowd of protesters and killed one, Heather Heyer. Thomas Rousseau, 23, the former leader of Vanguard America's Texas chapter, created Patriot Front around some of the hard lessons that the far right had learned from Charlottesville. Rousseau realized that openly embracing neo-Nazi iconography and rhetoric, as Vanguard America had done, was detrimental to the movement's broader goals of radicalizing more people to white nationalist ideology. Instead, Patriot Front cultivates a preppy Americana aesthetic, kill him up, and relies on euphemism to express old racist tropes and ideas. Another key lesson from Charlottesville that Rousseau built into Patriot Front was how members should mobilize in public. The majority of white supremacists who marched in Charlottesville did so with their faces uncovered, meaning that they were easily identifiable. Many of those who attended reported losing their jobs as a result of their participation. Patriot Front goes to great lengths to conceal their identities. When they appear in public, they do so with their faces completely covered. Typically arrive to events flash mob style, in a fleet of unmarked cars, U-Hauls, or Penske moving trucks, and then leave quickly. Members are required to fulfill a quota for distributing the group's propaganda, like flyers and posters, which they scatter across their respective regions, and are required to take videos or photos of their handiwork, which are then sent to Rousseau as proof. Members are also asked to pay out of pocket for those stickers and posters, which Rousseau himself prints. They have an exhaustive vetting process and are required to use aliases even when communicating with each other. Despite all these precautions, they've been infiltrated several times by anti-fascist activists who've leaked their communications, hundreds of gigabytes in total that left-wing media outlet Unicorn Riot has organized and published. Activists also have a blog dedicated to doxing Patriot Front members called Patriot Fail. There were just 4 names that overlapped with the list of members that activists had previously identified. All arrestees, who have since been bonded out, were expected in court Monday to be arraigned on a single misdemeanor charge for conspiracy to riot. The FBI has said that they are also investigating. To better reorganize them, I guess. There we go. What these arrests mean for the future of Patriot Riot are currently... Try that again. What these arrests mean for the future of Patriot Riot, well, that's why it threw me, is currently unclear, not are currently unclear. If convicted on conspiracy to riot, misdemeanor charges, they could get 6 months in county jail, a maximum fine of $1,000 or both. Membership numbers have been kept under wraps in the past, but were estimated earlier this year to be around 220. And on Monday, local activists in Charlottesville, Virginia, noticed a fresh Patriot Front propaganda sticker in the alleyway dedicated to Heather Heyer, who was killed during a white supremacist attack 4 years ago. So there's that. I'm going to catch up with the chat in a minute. Let's do the third and final article here first. This is from Left Coast Right Watch. Phoenix School Board candidate is registered agent for 3%er group led anti-LGBTQ campaign. This is from June 9 by Arizona Right Wing Watch. A far-right takeover is happening throughout the country at the local level. In Florida, at least half a dozen former and current members of the neo-fascist Proud Boys have secured official positions with the Miami-Dade Republican Party. So just a comment, the Republican Party is actively encouraging this. I said that in the last video, actually. After the Bush-Cheney administration had significantly, from the more establishment wing of the Republican Party, advanced U.S. imperial interest, launching the War on Terror, Patriot Act, all that kind of stuff, and then, of course, going out with a bang, the 2008 global financial meltdown. After they burned out all goodwill and credibility in that wing of the party, they needed a new one. The Democratic Party kind of took over as the maintainers of empire, the credible maintainers of empire, and the Republican Party rebranded with these Tea Party berserkers as their new face. So like I said before, that far-right movement, whether it's the, John Birchers or like whatever it is out there, that's been around for a long time. They rounded those people up and welcomed them into the Republican Party. It became the Tea Party. And then they used it to create more of these people. It's why all these young people under the age of 35 didn't exactly like grow up listening to shortwave radio during the Cold War. They're now taking on these views. So the Republican Party is absolutely an engine for this. As I've said before, the Democratic Party, while they occasionally call it out, they don't effectively fight any of it. But they do block the left from effectively fighting any of it, and also from fighting against the Democratic Party. This is why it is not an option anymore for us to get organized independently. Anyway, across the country, white nationalist propagandist Vincent James Fox relocated from California to the small Idaho town of Post Falls, where he's already cozied up with far-right politicians as high-ranking as the lieutenant governor, and has expressed interest in running for local races himself. These are just a few examples. School boards have become hotspots for the far right to make their presence known. During the COVID-19 pandemic, fascist militias and affiliates of various patriot movements responded to school safety measures by literally storming school board meetings in Vail, Arizona, and Portland, Oregon. In Washington, over a dozen 3%ers have quickly gained political positions throughout the state, including 5 school board seats. Similarly, a member of an Arizona sect of 3%ers has been identified to be running for Deer Valley Unified School District in Phoenix. Paul Allen Carver Jr. made no real attempt to hide his connection to the Union of 3%er American Patriots, or UTPAP, which displays the traditional 3%er logo of the far-right militia movement. UTPAP is registered as a nonprofit under the Arizona Corporate Commission, with Carver named as the lead agent. He even lists his own home for their registered address, which also matches the address under his candidate statement of interest. So remember, as these people are taking positions within the capitalist government, they're not anti-capitalist. They just represent a more openly terroristic form of capitalist rule. The Three Percenters are a decentralized militia movement that spawned out of the Obama era. So again, that sort of Tea Party post-2008 milieu. They're often described as anti-government, right? But they're more than happy to take local political offices to get what they want. And they're not really anti-government. They're anti-workers' rights. They're anti-social democracy. They're fascist. So that's it. They're not anti-government. The government is a capitalist government. That's what the government is there for. They don't actually want to stop that. They're pro-capitalism. But they are, at best, useful dupes of the big capitalists to tear down all the restrictions that capitalists face. UTPAP is only one of many chapters spread throughout the country. Over 330 different Three Percenter groups were active between 2016 and 2019. Throughout the years, members affiliated with Three Percenter groups have been connected to violence, including the bombing of the Dal al-Farouk Islamic Center in Bloomington, Minnesota. They're really, going after the people, really, their hands on the levers of power. No. Three Percenters were also present for Unite the Right in Charlottesville, Virginia, and several members have been indicted for charges related to the January 6th Capitol attack. So again, when people try to minimize January 6th just because the Democrats are talking about it and disingenuously trying to fundraise off it, no, it's a problem. It's full of people like this. Growing fascism in the United States is a problem. Just that the Democratic Party isn't going to do anything about it. They're not an anti-fascist party. In Canada, the Three Percenters are a designated terrorist group, alongside other extremist networks like the Proud Boys, Atomwaffen Division, and the Base. Doesn't that translate to Al-Qaeda? Anyway, the irony. On UTPAP's website, the first two questions on their FAQ lazily attempts to address the accusations that they're racists and domestic terrorists. Yeah, we're not racist. We just attack Islamic centers. Well, the government says Three Percenters are domestic terrorists, the website asks, before immediately disregarding the question and blaming the label on a, quote, rumor started by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Right. Carver already has a small presence in Arizona conservative politics, serving as a precinct committeeman in Legislative District 15. On September 6, 2020, he also co-hosted Silent No More Red Wave Vehicle Parade, a dud caravan protest where he and about 24 vehicles drove around the valley in support of Trump. Others in attendance included 2020 Phoenix mayoral candidate Marissa Hamilton and Gateway pundit disinformation writer and alleged domestic abuser Jordan Conradson. On April 4, Carver spoke and gathered signatures at a North Valley Constitutional Republicans meeting in Anthem at Amped Coffee Company. Carver's speech focused on the usual conservative school board-related grievances like critical race theory. North Valley Constitutional Republicans founder Basil Fernamos hosts the bi-monthly meetup where aspiring politicians like Carver and conspiracy theory-friendly gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake campaigned to the crowd. Last year, Fernamos told Anthem-based news site The Foothills Focus that he was previously active with the local militia movement, but he's also listed as an incorporator for the Union of 3% American Patriots. Fernamos' own Facebook page, also, because of course he's on Facebook, also lists the website for the Anthem Minutemen under his intro section. Quote, I started in the militia in Arizona, Fernamos told the Foothills Focus. Quote, I decided that the more realistic and intelligent path was to take the political way first and use that as a backup, unquote. The North Valley Constitutional Republicans is affiliated with the DC-based conservative interest group FreedomWorks, known for its role in boosting the Tea Party and blatant climate denialism. FreedomWorks also tries to get far-right candidates elected and hosts seminars to train potential candidates. In May, FreedomWorks hosted a Parents Know Best conference with, quote, critical race theory propagandist James Lindsay and potential school board candidates, including Paul Carver. By the way, critical race theory, I have a video on this. I'll link to it in the description, including when James Lindsay appeared on some talk show. I forget if it was Dr. Phil or what, made a complete ass of himself on the show. If you're outside of their little bubble, none of this stuff makes the slightest bit of sense. The interview people are like, Yeah, I'm against critical race theory. What is critical race theory? Well, I don't know, but I'm against it. That is fairly typical. So when you try to counter this stuff, it's just not coming from a place of like information, knowledge, and truth. They're not really interested in that stuff. It's about ignorance and hate. That's where it's coming from. And you can't necessarily make them take up the information. You can't necessarily shame them into it. There's a lot of willful ignorance that goes into this. So that's one of the challenges for combating it. Anyway, there's a tweet from Paul Carver. Amazing opportunity to learn from other concerned parents and school board candidates from across the nation at BEST headquarters in Washington, D.C. Slogans like "Here to save the nation," etc. But, these people, they pose absolutely no threat to the people who actually have power. All they're doing is tearing down actually any challenges to the existing order. Workers fighting for workers' rights, other people fighting other special kinds of oppression, racism, heterosexism, so on. Like, that's who they're actually attacking. Unsurprisingly, Carver's political activism at Deer Valley Unified also includes leading a hate campaign against LGBTQ plus students. Nothing can be more loathsome or vile than this. At a March school board candidate night, Carver explained the reason he decided to run. Quote, "We have so many different things attacking children's innocence." I'm assuming that militarism and violence is number one on the list. No, I'm sure it isn't. They don't get to make it to 18 anymore and still be children. So what's first on the list? Militarism and violence, inability of parents to make a decent living, to provide medical care. No, is it any of that? Probably not. Is it environmental racism, forcing certain groups to live in polluted areas? Like, no, of course it's not that. It's the shit that you made up. They get to school as early as preschool and kindergarten, and they have to deal with, does Johnny really think he's a boy, and that kind of nonsense. And that's unacceptable. So I need for us to get back to a more basic kind of schooling. Well, that's what you need, but fuck you. For the April 12 Deer Valley Unified School District Board meeting, Paul Carver organized parents to speak out against the upcoming Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network's Day of Silence. The GLSEN Day of Silence is a decades-old annual event where students take a day-long vow of silence in solidarity with LGBTQ students. No official event related to the Day of Silence was being hosted by the district. In other words, making issues out of things that aren't actually issues. There's a tweet from Carver. Our schools are spending, I'm not even going to read it. Oh, wait. Yeah, anyway. Just what can you, it needs to be fought. It needs to be fought. And we really need to see more instances of people fighting it. I mean, if you've seen one of these events where they organize the parents to go to the board meetings, it's an ugly display. I mean, ugly display. They need to be removed from the room. They need to be told that they're not welcome there, that they're just spreading hate, and so on. Please get organized for this. Carver's complaint lay with an email that circulated amongst district principals, teachers, and staff to inform one another that students might be participating in the Day of Silence or wear tape over their mouths, a popular symbolic gesture on the day. DVUSD was not officially endorsing, prohibiting, or coordinating any school-related events, but Carver used his 3 minutes of allotted time to whine about it anyway. Quote, "And if this topic were to be discussed, then it falls under the umbrella of sexual education. This in turn requires, if not legally, then ethically, for parental permissions to be involved. The school is not the place to teach or preach sexual alignment or personal beliefs, yet he has no problem with heterosexuality being preached or anything like that, just something that isn't that," Carver said at the DVUSD board meeting. I mentioned that other video where they talk about critical race theory and this other stuff. And why is he making an issue out of something that wasn't actually happening at the school? I don't know in this particular case, but I would suspect a lot of the way that these right-wing groups operate, and it's shown in that video, is, and I think the title of the video off the top of my head is like how to spot a far-right movement or something like that. But they just get their talking points off of like the Heritage Foundation website, and then they run with it, whether it's actually something going on in their real world community or not. very much not grassroots. The school district didn't cancel the event they were hosting in the first. The school district didn't cancel the event they weren't hosting in the first place. So in response, Carver encouraged parents to keep their children home, quote, as not to expose them to this lunacy, which again may or may not be happening. Carver's nonsensical grievances over GLSEN's Day of Silence was just one of many recent hate campaigns against the LGBTQ plus community. So, let's just take a moment to note, here's a, mildly comical example of a right-wing organizer sort of tripping up and organizing against something that wasn't happening, but they also organize against things that do happen, and that does put people who are just asserting their rights in danger. So another nearby school district, Peoria Unified, was also experiencing similar complaints over a faculty email explaining that some students might be wearing the colors of the trans flag in support of Trans Day of Visibility. Again, there were no actual events being sponsored by the district. The email was simply to encourage teachers to be supportive of any LGBTQ plus students who might be possibly participating on their own free will. Yet, PUSD was also met with angry Republicans complaining about the possibility of LGBTQ plus students existing, including Peoria School Board candidate Heather Rooks and January 6th participant, again, and State Senate candidate Anthony Kern. The far right taking over more positions of power coinciding with the increased legislative attacks against the LGBTQ community is no coincidence. Arizona has been particularly hostile, with Republican legislators trying to pass over a dozen restrictions on LGBTQ rights. Some bills failed, while others are on indefinite hold, but next session will surely see more anti-LGBTQ bills introduced. As LCRW previously reported, again, that's Left Coast Right Watch, 2 transphobic bills were signed into law by Governor Doug Ducey on the eve of the year's Trans Day of Visibility. So clearly, that was purposeful. One targeting healthcare for trans youth, the other, healthcare isn't targeted enough in this country. The other banning trans women from school sports. Sponsors of many of these past and proposed anti-LGBTQ plus laws included Oath Keeper lawmakers Wendy Rogers, Kwong Nguyen, and Mark Finkem. Rogers has openly expressed her hatred for the LGBTQ community, regularly referring to transgender people by slurs, characterizing LGBTQ people as groomers, and, quote, joking about trans people being killed. Yeah, that isn't a joke. Representative Jake Hoffman, who operated a troll farm for anti-LGBTQ hate organization Turning Point USA. Wow, I haven't seen them referenced in a while. Also sponsored several of the anti-LGBTQ bills over the last session, including one that sought to ban books that have any mention of homosexuality. In May, the Arizona Republican Party even targeted an LGBTQ plus student chat room resource service provided by the Arizona Department of Education. The attack mirrored a similar right-wing hate campaign against the Trevor Project and was amplified by the anti-LGBTQ plus hate account Libs of TikTok, run by New York real estate saleswoman and Capitol Riot attendee Chaya Raichik, incidentally defended by Glenn Greenwald. In a fundraising email, the Arizona GOP characterized the LGBTQ online resource as a, quote, groomer-inspired sex chat. Carver's campaign for DVUSD School Board has been endorsed by council member for Peoria's Mesquite District, Brad Schaefer, and Representative Steve Kaiser. Kaiser was the lead sponsor of HB 2161, which expanded Arizona's Parental Bill of Rights and originally included a measure that would force teachers to out LGBTQ students to their parents. That is sickening. In North Carolina, lawmakers are also seeking to pass a parental bill of rights that would specifically target LGBTQ students and includes a similar measure that would require teachers to forcibly out trans students to their parents. Carver's campaign has heavily highlighted his own support for the parental bill of rights. Quote, the pro-education Democratic groups need to take a deeper look at what the extreme right and GOP groups are doing to support school board candidates who are actively trying to destroy public education. They need to step up and protect education at all levels, not just the bigger races, a local parent who asked not to be named at DVUSD told LCRW News. So no offense to that local parent, but this is naive. The Democratic Party knows what's going on. It's not like they don't have intelligence resources. They are part and parcel of the system. And the people who fund that party want to allow this to continue. That's the direction they want to take the country in. The Democratic Party are part of controlled opposition that does not effectively stand in the way, but they do effectively stand in the way of people trying to actually stop it. DBUSD is no stranger to school board controversy. In March, Torch Antifa identified Arizona Legislative District 20 Republican committeeman William Bill Fisher, committee man, I guess that should have been, Bill Fisher, as a longtime white supremacist. Fisher operated virulently racist social media accounts under the pseudonym Preston Brooks, a nod to the pro-slavery representative revered by white supremacists for beating an abolitionist to near death. Under the numerous alts, including an active account on the neo-Confederate site Occidental Descent, Bill Fisher openly referred to black and Jewish people by slurs, praised Hitler, and fantasized about lynchings. Bill's wife, Kim Fisher, was aware of the racist activities of her husband as she followed his pseudonym account on Gab and Facebook and openly expresses pro-Confederate views herself. Parents called for Fisher to resign, but she refused. Last part of the article here, quote, "We will have to decide on the best two candidates for DVUSD and promote them a lot because the Liberal team will work hard," Kim Fisher commented on a post of Carver's. Strangely enough, Carver's campaign website has a typo. Call for DVSD School Board omits the unified in the district's name. Corrected URL, Paul for DVUSD redirects to this article. Paul Allen Carver Jr. did not respond to LCRW's request for comment. So that's the end of our news stories for today. I'm going to check in with the chat, and we are going to wrap it up for today. So what do we have going on? Oh, God. Is there an infracell person in here? All right. We're going to catch up with the chat. When did I find the place? I'm alarmed, says a commenter, by how strident even mainstream rightists are becoming with anti-queer rhetoric. I'm just unsure how widespread such sentiment is. Is it common among the population, or am I seeing a relatively small number of extremists? Well, hopefully these articles shed some light. I think it's extremely common in the Republican Party. Just look up the Disney groomers thing. It was all over social media. So, yeah. I mean, and as far as, actually, you know what? There's one more thing, and this can be kind of a teaser for the GOP stuff. So we covered some of the, you know, like 3%ers and shit like that in this video. We're going to get more into how this has been mainstreamed into the Republican Party in the next live stream, whenever that is. So here's just a headline. Republican Representative Tom Rice, who voted for Trump's impeachment, says that the ex-president is, quote, purging the GOP. And you gotta fucking laugh. If you know anything about the Republican Party, he's complaining that the GOP is, or that someone in the GOP, Trump in this case, is trying to turn the party into a bunch of yes men loyalists. I'm sorry, was there anything else ever in the Republican Party? Oh, you just don't like it because it's Trump's people. This gaggle of like even more crass bandits and gangsters that Trump is bringing in. These like, you know, non-country club, I mean, Trump is, but some of these people being brought in, these sort of less slick, you know, just kind of like openly racist hicks, that kind of thing. But trying to pretend that the Republican Party was ever something aside from a bunch of yes men loyalists, that to me is interesting. You know, but this is like the future of the Democratic Party right here. Like, I left the Republican Party after they started openly doing Hitler salutes. Yeah, well, where were you during the whole torture phase? Where were you during the whole let's like launch numerous wars on multiple countries that have not committed any aggression against the U.S. Over and over? You know, where were you during any number of events? Where were you during the war on the poor? No, but this is where you're drawing the line. It's utterly self-serving, and they just want to preserve that sort of like old school, select country club Republican vibe, which was always fucking garbage. But the point is expecting that the Republican Party is going to fight this, or that, yeah, I mean, the Democratic Party is not fighting it. You think the Republican Party is going to fight it? So no, it's becoming, I think, thoroughly mainstream throughout, just sort of like grassroots Republican, because this is what the Republican Party is increasingly becoming. It used to be these like sort of fringe weirdos, but that is the new Republican Party. And because none of them can think critically and they're motivated by tribalism, everybody just goes along with it. Or at best, they're going to jump ship and then become the new right wing of the Democratic Party. So yeah, I'd say it's pretty widespread. All right, that was actually an earlier comment, but I missed it. So scrolling down to catch up. Fascism always starts with the petty bourgeoisie. Yeah, so just a reminder, if you go to the homepage, the home tab on the S4A YouTube channel, there are some playlists by topic. Check out the Understanding Fascism and Right-Wing Movements playlist. There's a lot about it. Want to understand the nature of fascism, that playlist will help you out. Another comment, Arizona is like the state that has all the far right people, Baked Alaska, etc. Like even at the 1/6 thing, so many came from Arizona. Yeah, not exactly like a noted progressive bastion. Do I think Jimmy Dore is wrong in saying these guys are all feds? I think there's like the amount of overlap between this ideology and law enforcement ideology is massive. So I think what you see is a lot of, Border Patrol and other like, different cop agencies. This is just what they think in the first place. It's why they became like that's why they followed the profession. They wouldn't be able to do the job if they didn't think shit like this in the first place. So the amount of overlap is significant. As far as saying they're all feds, in what sense? Like I don't listen to Jimmy Dore, so I don't know at this point. I entertained Jimmy Dore on and off for a number of years. He really lost me at the Boogaloo thing. That was about a year and a half ago now. I'm not really up to date with everything going on there. But saying they're all feds like they're all plants, yeah, I think your next comment is correct. We are a fascist. The United States is a fascist culture. You don't need feds to make stuff like this. Um, I think that the United States is a fascist engine. Its government is full of people who think this way, and they also, in their spare time, join mass movements. Is there coordination and monitoring by police agencies? Well, from the history that we know of how US intelligence agencies handle mass movements, both on the left and the right, it would be an anomaly if they weren't also monitoring and trying to stoke different things in mass movements. So I would say that that's a given. But yeah, I think you're correct that there is like a spontaneous organic character to this as well. Yeah, so okay, actually, your next comment. More likely, these groups form organically, and then FBI gets involved to make themselves seem like heroes, and all they do is accelerate and fund these operations. Yeah, I mean, again, these movements support the status quo. They're not actually like a challenge to power at all. So this is a project of the ruling class. This is the next phase of neoliberalism, is just going into neo-fascism. So it looks at times like there are, we can talk about contradictions within the ruling class. There are some, and we shouldn't ignore them. But look at the progression. Look at it over time. There's a definite arc to this thing. You know, the Democratic Party pushed out all of its left liberals and social democrats by the late 70s into the, well, not by the late 70s, but, you know, you could say beginning in the late 70s into the 80s, you had like the Reagan Democrats and stuff like that. By the 90s, Bill Clinton became the standard bearer of the party. The party had moved significantly right. Even the Republican Party kept moving right. So there's a definite arc to all this stuff. Is the ruling class an absolute monolith? No. Is there a clear progression over time as far as which way that struggle is going? Yeah, absolutely. So, another comment. I swear Arizona is home to militias and all this stuff, and it's just the state packed with all those things. I really wonder how our comrades there are working against this. Also in Arizona, you can't teach K through 12 students any, quote, ethnic studies. So they can't even learn about the Latinx community in the state or even the Mexican American Connex history of the state. It's banned by law. So I did not know that. That is scary. Uh, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think there's going to be, as the lines get drawn, some places that are certainly not going to be communist strongholds, let's put it that way. I think some of this like Patsock thinking, to the extent that it is truly an error in anyone's thinking and not merely a cynically engineered thing to try to corrupt people's understanding of socialism as the movement against capitalism gets going. Um, I think some of it is just out of sheer desperation that, to believe in there's a good guy somewhere. And it's like this desperate, almost like Stockholm syndrome, just grasping at straws. Like our captors are actually our liberators. No, they're really not. But I think, it is incredibly depressing developing class consciousness and political consciousness and becoming aware. If you like grew up in Arizona, all your family's there, it'd be hard for you to like leave the state or whatever, that you're surrounded by like such immense reaction. And I can see, people going, especially young people, going through a period of denial, not really wanting to fully accept that. But you gotta find more supportive people that can help you, you know, not throw your life away on that stuff. So next comment, my DSA chapter helped me win a seat on our local school council. I will totally remove these assholes if they show up. Do what you can. Absolutely. And, we need people standing up. So, isn't Washington bad with this kind of stuff? Yeah, rural Washington. So look up the Northwest Territorial Imperative. I mentioned this in previous videos. It is basically like a white nationalist push to take over the Pacific Northwest. So yeah, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, that is pretty significant. TPUSA is based in Phoenix, Arizona, so it kind of makes sense that they would do that on their home turf. In Montana, they have a massive reactionary event run by the Alex Jones co-host Jay Dyer called Orthodox Montanica, and they want people to move there and be even more reactionary. Uh, Jay Dyer, do you want me to talk about Jay Dyer or Brother Augustine or David Erhan? I'm actually not familiar with any of those people. I know who Alex Jones is, but my familiarity with Alex Jones sort of ceased to be current years ago, so I'm not familiar with them. But I'll check it out. Since they're all reactionary, but try to use religion to get people into believing racist. Wait a minute, you're saying people use religion to push reactionary views and bigotry? I don't believe it. Will I respond to Matt Walsh? Will I respond to Matt Walsh saying what? Okay. This country is wholly fascist, hence people actually volunteering after watching Top Gun in record numbers. Yeah, when you can be that swayed by a fucking movie with Tom Cruise in it, there may have been no hope for your brain, like in the first place. Heard that about the old Top Gun. Not sure if they have the numbers in yet for this new. Yeah, I don't know. Imperial propaganda is effective, especially in a dying empire. Went to Las Vegas. It was a capitalist realist hellscape. Yeah, I think it has been for a long time. If you look at Stephen King's The Stand, kind of like a big apocalyptic good versus evil story. I think there's a good reason that Las Vegas was the place that the evil people rallied around. Top Gun script made by DoD, correct. Look at something called Operation Hollywood, book written a while ago about that. Um, I think the same is true of like Transformers, like any movie that heavily uses military stuff, in order to get like Pentagon support for it at all. You have to basically give the Pentagon like censor control over your script and like not portray them in a negative light or really any light that they don't want. So, comment, I think a lot of Patsock shit was just developed on the fly to avoid getting owned online. Yeah, although there's another way to just, if you're sincere about learning, just like be like, oh, sorry, I fucked up. That happens. So, yeah. Call of Duty gets them on board with US imperialism at a young age. Yeah, so militainment, you look up that topic, there's a lot written about this. I don't know if it was Call of Duty or what's the army thing, something heroes or something, but I mean, there was a thing I saw about they specifically like I don't know if it's just in tournaments or whatever, but they have recruiters approach like the high scoring players, people who spend a lot of time playing it and do well in the game. They approach them and be like, "How would you like to do this in real life?" So yeah, they're recruitment vehicles. Call of imperialism. There you go. Anyway, I'll wait for another minute for just any other comments people want to get at the last minute. Otherwise, I got to wrap up. I did not mention, or did I mention the patrons? Wow. Yesterday's live stream and today's live stream are blurring together for me. That means I need a break. But we'll thank the patrons while we're waiting for just any last minute comments. Names in yellow have been supporting for a year or more. Thank you very much to everyone. All the support is appreciated. It allows me to spend as much time as I do. More money will allow me to spend more time on it. Bills to pay, and just, it is what it is. But it's all encouraging. It's all materially helpful. And really appreciate it that there is this community that consistently, from month to month, it's not always all the same people, but some of them are. Again, there's a lot of sustained support there, and want to recognize that. But, month to month, people are keeping it funded. I think that we're doing great for a channel that is 8,000 subs. There's a lot of support. I'm able to put out a lot of content a month. I shoot for 15 to 20 videos. A lot of times we're in excess of that on a monthly basis. And pretty soon the channel will be over 10,000. I really hope at some point it really starts to snowball, because really the more people getting educated, agitated, and organized on this stuff, it's key. And it's, to the extent that I feel like I can be putting out quality content on the channel, then I want to be doing it. If I ever get to a point where I feel like I have just literally nothing more to add or whatever it is, like I would, it's about raising the bar, so we want to keep the bar high. I want to be part of dropping the bar. Not that I anticipate that, but anyway, I'll keep doing it as long as I feel like this channel has a contribution to make. Obviously, this channel came out of the blue at one point. Nobody saw it coming. Other channels will do the same. And that sort of socialist media reflects the larger movement. As the movement grows, so will its media. So anyway, thanks to the patrons. And again, remember to engage with support, liking, sharing, subscribing, all that stuff. It's a cliche. I mean, in that every channel says it, but every channel says it because it really works. It's really effective, and it helps other, new viewers to see the channel and stumble across it when they might not have otherwise. All right, let's wrap up with some closing comments, and then we will be done for today. And that's about it. All right, well, thanks to everyone for showing up. Thanks for listening on YouTube as well. And we will catch you in the next video. Lots more short and medium length audiobooks coming up soon, as well as live streams next week. I just bit my tongue on the last sentence of the live stream. Like I couldn't have just wait anyway. We'll see you next time.